Some loves begin blazing like fireworks, then wither away in silence, leaving an emptiness that feels impossible to fill. Yet sometimes, out of those very losses, a quiet miracle appears. A child, an unexpected reunion, a second chance. This is not only a story about love and betrayal, but also a journey of resisting absence, relearning trust, and building a new family from broken pieces. A story where darkness and light coexist, reminding us that sometimes the most actual miracle is simply the choice to stay. Daniel Reyes had never believed in coincidence. To him, everything followed rules: company growth, funding rounds, market indexes. He had learned early on that those who trusted luck were often failures, while only those who calculated, prepared, and worked relentlessly could climb to the top. At 30, Daniel had become one of the youngest tech CEOs in Chicago, owning Technova, a startup that had risen into a $100 million empire. People called him a genius, the golden boy of tech. But in the long nights spent alone in his cold penthouse overlooking the Chicago River, Daniel knew that behind all those dazzling numbers, his life was nothing but emptiness wrapped in a crowded schedule. That evening, in early October, Chicago was struck by sudden rain. Winds from Lake Michigan whipped across the city, turning the downpour into heavy gray curtains, drumming against streets and the glass walls of skyscrapers. Daniel had exited Technova's Loop headquarters after 16 hours of non-stop work. He planned to walk to the parking lot 4 blocks away. His dark gray Italian suit was soaked within minutes, his carefully styled black hair clinging to his forehead, turning him into a lost figure in nature's fury. Chicago at night was usually vibrant, but the heavy rain sent people rushing for shelter. Taxis sped through flooded streets, tires splashing waves as if mocking pedestrians. Daniel hated randomness, hated being forced out of his plans, and this storm was certainly not on his schedule. He stopped under the awning of a convenience store, sighed, and considered calling his company driver. But when he lifted his head, his eyes caught the warm golden light spilling out of a nearby building. The polished brass sign read, "Horizon Art Gallery, Whispers of the Heart, an exhibition by Aaliyah Carter." Daniel had never cared about art. To him, paintings were nothing but luxury items hung on walls to prove status. Yet, in that moment, the light from Horizon Gallery felt like a lighthouse in the storm. He hesitated briefly, then crossed the rain and pushed the door open. The atmosphere inside swallowed him whole. From the pounding storm outside, he fell into another world. Soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers, the clinking of crystal glasses, the low murmur of lively conversation. The scent of red wine blended with polished wood, and a faint warmth of pine oil filled the room. White walls were lined with oil paintings, colors exploding under golden lights. Visitors, most dressed elegantly, moved slowly, pausing to chat, glasses of wine in hand. Daniel stood still for a moment, like an intruder from another world. His soaked suit clung to his body, his leather shoes stained with rain, making him stand out among the calm men in tuxedos and the women in evening gowns. But no one paid him attention. His gaze was drawn toward a bright space in the center, where a woman stood before a large canvas. Aaliyah Carter wore a deep sapphire silk dress that draped gracefully over her figure. Her honey-brown skin caught the light as though sculpted from moonlight. Her natural curls framed her face, each movement rippling like waves. But it wasn't just her appearance that silenced the room. It was her voice. "This one is called Eternal Longing," Aaliyah said, her eyes fixed on the canvas of silver-blue seas. "I painted it during a stormy night. Storms like these strip away our pretense. They force us to feel what we've been avoiding." The crowd around her nodded, some smiling with admiration. Daniel moved closer, as though pulled by an invisible thread. The painting before him was a tempest, emerald waves churning violently, streaks of silver lightning tearing through the dark. Yet amid the chaos, a gentle light glowed like a promise that dawn would follow the storm. Aaliyah continued, her voice warm, resonant like music. "The longing here isn't pain, it's faith. It's the heart's call, trusting that somewhere in the universe, another heart is calling back." At that moment, her eyes swept the crowd and stopped on Daniel. The gaze lasted only seconds, but it froze the world. Daniel had looked into thousands of faces, rivals, investors, women dazzled by wealth, but he had never seen eyes like hers surprised, recognizing, piercing straight into his soul. Both fell silent. Aaliyah's words died on her lips. The audience chuckled softly, then dispersed toward other paintings, leaving a space where only the two of them remained. Daniel spoke, his voice deeper than usual. "This painting, it feels like looking into someone's soul." Aaliyah smiled, not a polite smile, but one warm enough to light the entire room. "Do you collect art?" she asked. "No," Daniel admitted. "I don't understand art. I just ran in here to escape the rain." Aaliyah tilted her head, her gaze never leaving him. "Maybe that's why you see the truth. Those who don't try to pretend often feel the deepest. What do you see in this painting?" Daniel looked again, but this time, instead of the waves, his eyes were caught by hers as though the answer was there. "I see an active waiting. Not surrender, but trust that something beautiful is coming. Someone standing at the edge of the familiar, ready to step into the unknown, only because they believe something wonderful awaits." Aaliyah drew a sharp breath, her hand instinctively pressing against her chest as if to steady her heart. "That is exactly what I felt while painting it. Most people only see chaos or sorrow, but you—" Her words drifted into a heavy yet gentle silence. Daniel felt as though he had admitted something he had never dared before. A server passed with a tray of wine, but Daniel declined, his eyes locked on Aaliyah. Amid the jazz and fading storm, they knew this moment would not be easily erased. That night, the storm raged across Chicago, drowning streets, tearing umbrellas from hands, and flooding sidewalks. But for Daniel, the true upheaval had already happened inside the warm glow of Horizon Gallery. When Aaliyah finally whispered, "Do you want to see the rest?" Daniel should have said no. He had calls with Tokyo, contracts piling on his desk. But the refusal never came. He only nodded. "I have the whole night." And as she led him from painting to painting, speaking of darkness, lullabies, and dreams, Daniel realized he wasn't thinking of profits, charts, or numbers for the first time in years. He was only thinking of her voice and her eyes. The gallery was nearly empty when they returned to the main hall, and the rain outside had softened. "I don't want tonight to end," Daniel confessed, startling even himself. "Neither do I," Aaliyah whispered. Neither pulled away when their hands touched his cold, hers faintly stained with paint. "I know this sounds crazy," Daniel said, voice trembling, "but I feel like I've spent my whole life searching for this moment, searching for you." Her eyes shimmered, her lips quivered with unspoken words. Sometimes fate hides in the most accidental things. They left the gallery together, walking down Clark Street, washed clean by the rain. Streetlights gleamed off the wet pavement like mirrors. Daniel held the umbrella above them both. They strolled, speaking of books they loved, childhood dreams, and how the city looked more beautiful when seen through eyes that had just discovered love. At her apartment door, Daniel's chest tightened. He didn't want to say goodbye. "Can I see you again, tomorrow?" Aaliyah smiled, the lamplight dancing in her eyes. "Not dinner, not wine. Come to my studio at sunrise. I want you to see how I make magic." Daniel lifted and kissed her hand, something he had never done for anyone. "No matter what, I'll be there." As he finally walked back to his distant car, his suit rumpled, hair disheveled by the wind, Daniel felt something strange. The storm had washed away the lifeless shell he had carried for years. He had entered the gallery as a weary businessman, but he left as a man who had just found a reason to live genuinely. He didn't know that tomorrow's sunrise would change his life forever. The next morning, Chicago was still damp after the night's storm. The first rays of sunlight spread across Lake Michigan, turning it into a giant mirror that lit the city in the sharp chill of early October. Daniel Reyes had never once woken early unless for an international flight. But today, he was standing outside Aaliyah Carter's studio at sunrise. Her studio was on the third floor of an old building in Pilsen, the art district of Chicago, where walls were covered with graffiti, small cafes nestled between Mexican bakeries, and rows of red brick whispered of the city's industrial past. Daniel climbed the creaking wooden stairs, his heart pounding in a way he couldn't explain. He who had faced hundreds of stone-faced investors now had sweaty palms to meet an artist he had known for less than a day. The chipped blue door opened, and there was Aaliyah, not in the elegant gown from last night, but in faded jeans, a loose white t-shirt, and her curls tied loosely at the nape of her neck. Paint smudges stained her arms and hands, and yet Daniel thought she had never looked more beautiful alive. Unguarded, radiant. "You're early," she smiled, her voice still sweetly husky. "I didn't want to miss it," Daniel replied, and meant it. The studio opened up before him. High ceilings, tall windows flooding the room with morning light, canvases lining every wall, from massive oils to small charcoal sketches. A wooden table with brushes, palettes, jars of dried petals, and half-opened books was scattered. The space was messy yet warm like its owner. Aaliyah handed him a steaming cup of coffee, then stood before a blank canvas. "You want to see magic? Then you'll need patience. Painting isn't about creating something perfect. It's a conversation with yourself." Daniel sank into an old chair, quietly watching. She mixed colors, thinned them, raised her brush. Each stroke was fluid, confident, like she breathed a soul into the colors. He was used to watching coders pound keyboards and designers glide their mouse, but he had never seen anyone create the way she did. "What are you thinking?" Aaliyah asked, eyes never leaving the canvas. "I'm thinking, maybe I've never truly created anything," Daniel said slowly. "I only build systems. But you create entire worlds from nothing." Aaliyah paused, looked at him. In the morning light, her brown eyes shimmered. "You're building your own world. Don't diminish that. But if you want to really live, you must remember you're more than numbers." Daniel fell silent. Her words cut deeper than any speech he had ever heard. They spent the whole morning like that. She painted, he observed, and then talked about childhood. She spoke of growing up in a working-class family on the South Side, parents juggling 2 or 3 jobs to raise her. He told of being the son of Mexican immigrants, his parents dreaming that he would escape poverty at any cost. Aaliyah shared how she once lay awake listening to her mother's lullabies, dreaming of becoming an artist. Daniel remembered working beside his father in a mechanic's shop, his hands covered in grease but his eyes full of pride. By noon, the painting had taken form, blazing orange and gold, like a sunrise after a storm. Daniel looked at it and sighed. "This is something I never dared to believe existed." Aaliyah only smiled. In the following days, they began to see each other often, not at fancy dinners in expensive restaurants where Daniel had once taken ex-girlfriends to flaunt his success. With Aaliyah, things were simple. Coffee at a corner cafe, walks along the river, poetry readings at the public library. Daniel first brought her into his world at a tech gala. Aaliyah wore a sleek black dress, her curls loose, in a sea of corporate uniforms. Daniel didn't mention strategy or rivals when the press asked about his inspiration. He held her hand and said, "She makes me believe in miracles." The entire room fell silent for a moment, then erupted into applause. In return, Aaliyah introduced Daniel to her world. Small exhibitions where young artists sold paintings for just enough to buy a few meals, nights strumming guitars with friends in the park, free art lessons for children in poor neighborhoods. At first, Daniel felt out of place, but then he learned to sit on the floor, to listen to stories from people who had nothing to do with business or investments. He learned to find value in things that brought no profit at all. Gradually, they became 2 pieces that completed each other. He gave her stability and the courage to dream bigger. She gave him softness, the faith that life was more than a straight line. As snow blanketed the streets one winter evening, they sat in Daniel's penthouse. Once cold and sterile, filled only with minimalist furniture, it now overflowed with Aaliyah's paintings, plants she had brought in, and stacks of old books. Daniel looked around and chuckled softly. "You've turned this place into a home." Aaliyah turned, hot cocoa in hand. "What was it before I came?" "A box for holding success." She laughed, set the cup down, and walked toward him. "Maybe you need a box for holding love, too." Daniel looked into her eyes, instantly knowing he couldn't live without her. The proposal came quickly just 6 months after they met, but to Daniel, those 6 months felt like an entire lifetime. He didn't prepare with money, but with memories. He rented Horizon Art Gallery where they first met and turned it into a shrine of love. When Aaliyah stepped inside, she saw the walls lined with photos Daniel had secretly taken. Her painting, laughing, reading. At the center was a painting commissioned from her friend Marcus Green, based on Daniel's story. The two of them holding hands, walking through a storm, light shining down like a blessing. Daniel knelt, holding his grandmother's vintage ring, a gold band set with sapphire, and said, "Aaliyah Carter, you taught me that love isn't a reward, but the reason to live. Will you let me call you family, from this day to forever?" Tears streamed down her face. She nodded, whispering, "Yes." Applause erupted. Friends, colleagues, family all around. But for them, only two people existed in that moment. The wedding came 3 months later at Garfield Park Conservatory. Surrounded by lush greenery under the glass roof, Aaliyah walked in wearing a simple yet radiant white dress. Daniel, in a grey suit, had red-rimmed eyes the moment he saw her. They exchanged vows. "I promise to choose you, even when the world pulls me elsewhere, and I promise to believe in us, even when everything outside falls apart." Music swelled, petals fell like rain, and they kissed the kiss of two souls certain they had found their missing half. That day, it felt like all of Chicago had fallen silent, not because of a lavish wedding, but because it witnessed true love, explosive, fierce, and ready to defy the world. Daniel and Aaliyah lived as though inside a dream in the first months after their wedding. Daniel's once cold penthouse had transformed into a home. Aaliyah's paintings covered the walls. Small plants lined the windowsills, and the smell of morning coffee filled the kitchen. They cooked together, walked along the river, and planned future travels. To their friends, they were the image of modern love. A successful young tech CEO and a rising painter, complementing each other perfectly. But marriage is not only peaceful mornings and sweet kisses. It is also habits, pressures, and above all, daily choices. And it was in those choices that the first cracks began to appear. Daniel was still CEO of Technova, a company racing toward international expansion. Business life hadn't slowed after the wedding. If anything, it had accelerated, grown harsher. He often left the office past midnight, laptop stuffed with reports and plans. At first, Aaliyah tried to be patient. She prepared elaborate dinners, seared salmon, fresh salad, and a glass of red wine. But she often sat alone, watching the clock tick away, food cooling on the table before she tucked it into the fridge. When Daniel returned, usually after 11, he would kiss her cheek lightly and say the same tired line, "I'm sorry, love." The meeting ran longer than expected. Aaliyah smiled, but inside, she felt hollow. One evening, she asked, "Do you remember the last time we had dinner together?" Daniel hesitated. He was about to say last week, but then realized it had been nearly a month. He wrapped his arms around her, promising, "Next week I'll make it up to you. I'll give you the whole evening." But next week slipped by in time zone crossing calls. That promise joined the pile of forgotten fragments. While Daniel sank deeper into his world of conferences and spreadsheets, Aaliyah retreated into her studio. Her new paintings were no longer vibrant. Instead, they were filled with darkness and emptiness. One piece in particular caught her friend's attention, the silhouette of a man dissolving, leaving only a fading outline among cold blues and grays. Her best friend, Sophia Martinez, visited one evening. She stopped in front of the painting, frowning. "Is this Daniel?" Aaliyah gave a sad smile. "Not exactly. It's just the feeling of loving someone who is always absent." Sophia placed a hand on her shoulder. "You can't live on emptiness, Ali. You need to talk to him." Aaliyah nodded, but inside, she knew the truth. She had tried many times. Daniel listened, nodded, promised, then became busy again. Their lives drifted into two separate rhythms. By day, Daniel was consumed by Technova, while Aaliyah taught art classes for children and prepared for her solo exhibition. He buried himself in his laptop by night, while she disappeared into brushes and paint. They shared an apartment, but lived like two planets on separate orbits. While Daniel was deep in a call with Singapore one evening, Aaliyah walked over and laid a hand on his shoulder. "Can you pause for a moment? I want to show you my new painting." Daniel raised a finger, mouthing 1 minute, his eyes glued to the screen. 1 minute stretched into 30. When he turned back, Aaliyah had vanished into her studio, and the door closed. He stood before that door, uncertain. He knew he should knock, apologize, and give her time. But a new message popped up from his partners, and he returned to his desk instead. On one of the rare nights they sat down to dinner together, the conversation turned to family plans. "When do you think we should have children?" Aaliyah asked, her eyes bright. Daniel froze, spoon hovering midair. He had never honestly thought about it. "Maybe, not now. Technova is preparing for an IPO. I need to focus." Aaliyah gave a faint smile, but it never reached her eyes. "It's not always now. Don't you worry, we'll miss our chance." Daniel stayed silent. Numbers, meetings, and strategies crowded out everything else in his head. He didn't realize that a part of Aaliyah had pulled away at that moment. Chicago's winter was brutal. Snow blanketed the sidewalks, and the wind cut into skin. In the penthouse, Daniel was hunched over his screen. Aaliyah stood by the window watching the snow fall. She thought of the night they met the storm, their gaze, the promises. Back then, she believed they could survive anything. But now, in the cold silence of that vast apartment, she felt like a single woman living with a ghost. She whispered, unsure if he even heard, "Daniel, you're disappearing from my life." No answer came, only the keys tapping and the screen's glow on his tense face. One night, Aaliyah sat at the dining table with 2 plates of pasta. Daniel texted again, "Running late. Eat without me." She set the phone down, her heart hollow. She understood in that moment that marriages don't collapse due to fiery arguments. They crumble through absence, through promises unkept, through dinners eaten alone. Aaliyah Carter's first solo exhibition was a milestone she had prepared for months. 8 months of living with the smell of paint and turpentine, 8 months shut inside her small Pilsen studio, teaching free art classes for kids, while pouring her soul onto massive canvases. The collection was called Reflections of Love, a color diary. It told the story of her marriage, the blazing beginning, the sweet moments, then the empty spaces, the shadows creeping in, until the aching loneliness. To Aaliyah, this wasn't just an art show. It was her final message to Daniel, a reminder of how beautiful their love had once been, and how fragile it had become. On opening night, Horizon Art Gallery gleamed. The white walls glowed under warm light, each painting placed to guide viewers through a journey of emotion. Guests included Chicago's culture critics, collectors from New York, and even a few magazine journalists. Sophia Martinez had arrived early to help Aaliyah prepare. She picked out a flowing emerald dress for her friend, adding a delicate diamond necklace, the gift Daniel had given her on their first anniversary. "You look radiant," Sophia said, adjusting a strand of hair. "When Daniel arrives, he'll remember exactly why he fell in love with you." Aaliyah smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed unease. Daniel had promised he'd be there by 8, after a video call with investors in Singapore. She wanted to trust him, just as she had many times before. Guests flowed in, glasses of wine in hand, pausing long before each canvas. A Chicago Tribune critic scribbled notes, "Painfully honest, every color speaks." At the center hung Promise Kept, a recreation of their wedding dance. Under golden light, the painted groom's eyes captured from memory burned with pure devotion. Many guests gasped, saying they could feel the worship in that gaze. A wealthy collector shook Aaliyah's hand. "Your husband must be so proud. He was your inspiration, wasn't he?" She forced a smile, keeping her voice steady, though her heart clenched. She glanced at the clock. 8:15. Time passed. 8:30. 8:45. Each time the door opened, hope flared only to fade with the arrival of strangers. Guests kept asking about Daniel each time she repeated the same answer. "He's stuck in a meeting, but he'll be here soon." The smile on her lips grew stiff. By 9:15, the speeches were over. The most critical guests had already left. The crowd thinned, the room growing quieter. Aaliyah kept talking with those who remained, but inside, disappointment cut deeper by the minute. At 9:45, her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Crisis with Singapore deal. I'll come as soon as I can. Sorry, babe. No mention of the night's meaning. No recognition of her 8 months of labor. Just business. Always business. Aaliyah stared at the screen until the words blurred. She slipped the phone into her purse, eyes dry. She couldn't cry anymore. By 10:15, when only a handful of guests lingered, Daniel arrived. He strode briskly, immaculate in his expensive suit, leather briefcase in hand, phone still pressed to his ear. Spotting her, he smiled, rushing forward. "There you are, gorgeous," he said, kissing her cheek. "Sorry, I got held up, but I made it." Aaliyah stood still, her dark eyes heavy. The confident, polished, booming man before her suddenly felt like a stranger. "The exhibition is over, Daniel," she said softly, her voice steady but icy. He frowned. "Over? There are still people here. The important ones left long ago," she answered, eyes fixed on him. "You missed everything." Silence. Daniel inhaled, trying to regain control. "You have to understand, this deal is worth 60 million. I couldn't walk away. If it goes through, it's a huge leap for Technova. You don't understand." Aaliyah shook her head. "I don't understand how the man who once said my happiness mattered more than anything is now standing here justifying himself with numbers." His phone buzzed again. He glanced down just 2 seconds, but enough to kill what little remained. "I see it now," she whispered, her voice like a verdict. "I hoped wrong. Ali, listen to me. When will you ever have time for us? At home, you're busy. In bed, you're asleep. At my exhibition, you're still choosing your phone. There's no room for me in your world anymore." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He had persuaded boards of directors his whole life and won over impossible investors. But before his wife, he was speechless. He wanted to hold her, to explain that everything he did was for their future, but the words sounded terrifyingly hollow now. They left the gallery together, but walked in silence. The city was cold, streetlights reflecting in puddles, taxis hissing past, leaving ripples in their wake. Back at the penthouse, Aaliyah removed the necklace, setting it carefully in its box. Her hands trembled, but her face was calm. Daniel stood at the door, searching for words. She turned, her gaze dry and sharp. "Tomorrow you have Tokyo. Next week, Los Angeles. Next month, Berlin. I know your schedule better than you do." "What are you saying?" he pressed. "I've gotten too used to planning my life around your absence." The words cut like a blade. Daniel staggered back, unable to believe them. She looked straight at him. "I can't go on like this." 3 weeks later, they signed the separation papers in a lawyer's office that smelled of leather and stale coffee. The scratch of pens on paper sounded final. Assets were divided cleanly, no arguments, like strangers negotiating. On the desk, their wedding rings lay side by side, the cold metal gleaming as proof of a love that once burned fiercely. When Daniel walked out into the October wind, the chill tore through his chest. It wasn't just the loss of a marriage. He had just walked away from the best part of himself. Aaliyah Carter sat in the OB/GYN clinic on a grey Chicago morning, her hands icy despite the heat humming through the room. Outside, drizzle streaked across the fogged glass. 3 weeks earlier, she and Daniel had officially signed the divorce papers. The signing had been silent, no tears, no shouting, only the smell of leather chairs and the scratch of pens on paper. Now, as Dr. Grace Liu turned the ultrasound screen toward her and said, "Congratulations, you're 6 weeks pregnant." Aaliyah felt the world tilt. She stared at the black and white screen where a tiny flicker pulsed a heartbeat fast, fragile, yet stubbornly alive. "This is my baby?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Liu nodded, smiling. "Yes, that's the heartbeat, strong and healthy." The words were both comfort and shock. Aaliyah didn't know whether to cry or laugh. In that moment, a storm of emotions swept through her: terror, loneliness, and a gentle light she hadn't felt in a long time. Leaving the clinic, ultrasound paper was clutched in her hand, and she sat in her car for an hour. Her mind replayed the last months with Daniel: lonely dinners, empty waiting, the exhibition night that ended it all. If Daniel were here, what would he think? Would he see the baby as a gift or a burden disrupting million-dollar plans? The thought made her shiver. She pressed her palm against her flat belly, whispering, "I'll keep you. I'll protect you from everything that once broke me." Keeping the baby meant an entirely new path. Aaliyah knew how hard single motherhood in Chicago would be. Income from paintings was unpredictable, and her community art classes barely paid. But she didn't hesitate. In the final years of her marriage, she had already grown used to carrying everything alone. The only difference now was she had a reason to be stronger. In the weeks that followed, she reshaped her life. She found a small two-bedroom apartment on Capitol Hill, leaving behind the luxury penthouse she once shared with Daniel. The new place was modest, white walls peeling, windows overlooking a noisy street, but it was warm, free from broken promises swallowed by phones and meetings. In the tiny spare room, she set up a wooden crib, hanging soft blue and yellow paintings, colors of hope. She hadn't told Daniel. She often opened her phone, hovering over his name, her finger trembling on the call button. But she remembered Horizon Gallery each time the night he glanced at his phone, just when she needed him most. If a man could miss his wife's heart, could he ever be a present father? She refused to let her child grow up with a father who showed up only when convenient. Sophia Martinez was the first to know. When Aaliyah told her, Sophia froze, then pulled her into a fierce hug. "Are you sure? Do you plan to tell Daniel?" Aaliyah shook her head. "No. My baby isn't a weapon to drag him back. If he couldn't choose family when he had me, he won't choose it because of a baby. I won't let my child grow up feeling like a burden." Sophia nodded, eyes brimming. "I'll be here. You're not alone." Pregnancy alone was both lonely and powerful. Some mornings, Aaliyah vomited until her stomach ached, then still went to teach, smiling at the children. Some nights, she sat before the canvas, her belly just beginning to round, painting abstract shapes she called letters to my unborn. Every stroke was a promise. You will be loved, safe, and live in a world where schedules or contracts don't measure love. In the 5th month, she learned it was a boy. Tears streamed down her face as she held the ultrasound image. "A son," she whispered. "I'll call you Joshua." The name came like a beam of light. It meant salvation. And truly, this child was her salvation. In the following months, she worked tirelessly, taking on children's book illustrations, teaching evening art classes, and saving every dollar. Her apartment is filled with baby books, tiny clothes, and bottles. Sophia often came with bags of groceries, helping assemble the crib and repainting the nursery. Each time Aaliyah looked at the room, fresh and new, she felt a strange peace. Joshua was born on a snowy December morning after 16 hours of labor at Lurie Children's Hospital. His first cry tore through the air, and Aaliyah sobbed with him, tears rolling, her smile radiant. He weighed just over 6 pounds, small, but strong. The doctor placed him on her chest, warm skin against skin, his breath soft and alive. In that moment, all fear vanished. Only overwhelming love remained. She whispered, "Welcome to the world, Joshua. You are my miracle." In the little apartment, the days that followed were sweet chaos, sleepless nights of crying, clumsy diaper changes, meals left half-eaten as Joshua demanded milk. But Aaliyah never felt utterly alone again. She always had a tiny life depending on her, and a reason to wake and keep going. When Joshua slept in his crib, Aaliyah painted. Her art transformed, no longer shadowed, but glowing with light, filled with warmth. Galleries began to take notice. One critic wrote, "Carter's work now carries a strange vitality, fragile and resilient. Every layer has something new, like she has found a reason to love life again." Aaliyah never answered interviews about her inspiration. Only she and Joshua knew the truth. She thought of Daniel each time she held him, listening to his soft breaths. He still lived somewhere in the same city, no doubt buried in Technova and global deals. Perhaps he believed he had left the past behind. Aaliyah never planned to tell him. In her journal, she wrote for her son, "Your father is brilliant, but he forgot how to love fully. I won't let you grow up in the shadow of absence. You deserve love without condition." Joshua's early years were proof of that vow. He was raised with all her love, care, and strength, Their apartment was filled with paintings and laughter. Life wasn't wealthy, but it was warm. For Aaliyah, it was a new beginning, not perfect, but full of hope. She didn't yet know that one day, this child would be the bridge that would pull Daniel back into her life. For now, it was just her and Joshua, and that was enough. The first days with Joshua were chaotic, but Aaliyah Carter quickly found her rhythm. Her small Capitol Hill apartment in Chicago became its own world, where every cry, every smile, every tiny hand clasp redefined happiness. She painted while rocking him, taught children's classes while stealing naps during breaks. Joshua was the center, and Aaliyah orbited around him like a planet around the Sunday. Joshua grew fast, each month marked by a new milestone. At 3 months, he smiled a radiant smile that made Aaliyah cry as she whispered, "You are my light." At 6 months, he sat up, dark, curious eyes, reaching for anything within grasp. He toddled his first steps across the cramped living room at 1 year, collapsing into her arms. Aaliyah sketched that moment dozens of times, desperate to hold it forever. The older he grew, the more he resembled Daniel. From thick black hair to long curling lashes, from his curious posture to his focused gaze when stacking blocks. Each time she looked at her son, Aaliyah felt joy and ache. Daniel was written in every line of the boy's face, yet absent from his life. But Aaliyah refused to let that absence stain Joshua's childhood. She built a world of love around him. They shared simple breakfasts each morning, toast with peanut butter and fresh fruit from Maxwell Street Market. She took him to the park in the afternoons, watching from a bench as he played with other children, sometimes sketching his laughter in the sunlight, a summer gleam in Chicago's bitter cold. At night, the apartment filled with the scent of baby soap. She bathed Joshua, read him picture books, and sang lullabies her mother once sang. She worked only after he slept, illustration contracts, gallery sketches, or simply sitting to watch him breathe, reminding herself, every struggle is worth it. Finances were always tight, but she managed. Some paintings from her series Letters to My Unborn sold, bringing modest funds. Children's classes provided a steady income. She learned to budget every dollar from milk to rent. Sophia remained her anchor, often dropping by with groceries or watching Joshua so Aaliyah could rest. As Joshua grew, he became a lively, affectionate child. At 2, he sang snippets of lullabies Aaliyah had taught him. At 2.5, he sat at a little table, scribbling circles before holding them up proudly. "A painting by me and Mama." Aaliyah hugged him, laughing through tears. For the first time, art was not just her career, but the bond tying them together. Still, hidden sorrow surfaced at times. When Joshua saw fathers pushing swings at the playground, his eyes flickered with quiet longing. One night, while reading together, he asked innocently, "Mama, where's my dad?" The question froze her. She had prepared for this, but her heart still clenched. Stroking his hair, she whispered, "Your dad lives far away. But you know what? You are so loved. You are my whole world." Joshua studied her, then nodded. "Then it's just you and me. We're a team, right?" Aaliyah smiled through tears. "Yes, the best team." His childish words became her anchor. But when night fell, the darkness whispered of what was missing. She thought of Daniel, not the man who missed her exhibition, but the Daniel of that stormy night, when their eyes met before eternal longing. Sometimes, she wondered, did he ever remember? Did he ever imagine he might have a child? She refused to let herself seek the answer. By age 3, Joshua was sharper than expected. He loved listening to Aaliyah describe colors and how light shifted through the day. His keen eyes missed nothing. After a checkup, pediatrician Dr. Anthony Johnson remarked, "He has a rare curiosity. Encourage him, he'll grow beyond measure." Aaliyah nodded, pride mixed with fear. She knew she had to be strong enough to raise, protect, and guide him alone. 3 years of single motherhood had remade her. Stronger, more patient, yet often exhausted. Sleepless nights when Joshua was sick, frantic dashes through snow to pick him up from preschool, extra work until her body ached to cover rent, all etched themselves into her body and soul. But love for Joshua healed it all. In rare quiet hours, as he slept, Aaliyah painted. Her new canvases burst with light. Bright tones of fatigue blended with hope. The art world took notice. A collector from Los Angeles called, inviting her to a spring exhibition. She accepted not for money, but so Joshua would one day see that his mother had fought, had not given up. In her journal, she wrote, "Joshua, you are the reason I exist. I don't know what the future holds, but I promise you will never feel abandoned. You will always have me, a home, and love." She did not yet know that only months later, a fever in the middle of a winter night would shake that promise. And in her moment of desperation, the name she had avoided for 3 years would escape her lips. That call would change everything. Late March in Chicago was bone-chilling, wind howling through rows of old brick houses. Inside a small apartment, Aaliyah Carter sat by her son's bed, her palm pressed to Joshua's forehead. Heat radiated like fire, burning through her hand. Her 3.5-year-old panted, eyes glazed. The thermometer screamed red, 104.7 degrees Fahrenheit. All day, Joshua had shown mild flu symptoms. Aaliyah had given him fever medicine and wiped him down with cool towels, but the fever only climbed. When he began to drift into delirium, panic consumed her. Questions hammered in her skull. What if there's a complication? What if I lose him? The thought squeezed her chest until she couldn't breathe. She scooped Joshua into the car and sped toward Lurie Children's Hospital. The streets were deserted, red lights stretching like eternity. She twisted back to the rear seat each stop, whispering, "Stay with me, baby. Don't fall too deep. Mama's here." Joshua whimpered, "Mama, it hurts." The words sliced her heart open. At the ER, nurses rushed him inside. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, hair tied neatly, voice steady, explained quickly, "We'll start 4 fluids, reduce the fever, and run labs. We need to watch for seizures." Aaliyah nodded, tears blurring her vision, but forced herself to stand firm. The first hour was chaos, the needle sliding into his tiny vein, the monitor's relentless beeping, Joshua's weak cries. Aaliyah clutched his hand, singing softly, pouring calm into him. At last, the fever reducer worked. His temperature eased 104 to 102, then 100.5. Joshua fell into exhausted sleep, sweat beading on his brow. Only when the danger ebbed did Aaliyah realize how drained she was. Slumped in the chair beside his bed, he could hear the white walls and disinfectant close in. Her phone buzzed, battery almost dead. She tried calling Sophia, but the signal cut. No one else. Her parents, retired and frail, lived in another state. Friends are busy with their own lives. Loneliness pressed down, suffocating. Her trembling finger scrolled through contacts and stopped at the name she had avoided for 3 years, Daniel Reyes. Her heart pounded, half in fear, half in desperation. She had sworn never to let him into their child's life, but with Joshua lying there, wires and monitors attached, every primal instinct screamed, "Save him, no matter what." She pressed call. The line rang. Then a deep, familiar voice answered, rough with sleep. "Hello? Who is this?" Her throat closed, but the words broke free. "Daniel, it's me." Silence, sharp and stunned. Then his voice, clearer, urgent. "Aaliyah, my God, what's wrong?" Our son, he has a high fever. I'm at Lurie Children's. I'm scared." Her voice cracked apart. "Son?" Daniel repeated, shocked. Silence again, then a ragged breath. "Aaliyah, did you just say son?" The signal faltered. Aaliyah sobbed, words tumbling. "I'm sorry. I had no one else. Joshua needs you." Static swallowed her voice, then the call dropped. She stared at the dark screen, heart collapsing. She had done what she swore she wouldn't. She had told Daniel about Joshua. Less than 30 minutes later, hurried footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor. Aaliyah looked up and froze. Daniel stood in the doorway, suit wrinkled, tie askew, face pale with fear. His gaze darted to the hospital bed, then locked on the sleeping child. Joshua, with messy black hair, long lashes, and soft, round cheeks. Too clear. The mirror of Daniel's childhood photos. Daniel stopped dead, as though the ground had fallen away. "My God," he whispered. He's mine." Aaliyah's eyes, heavy with exhaustion, met his. Her voice was barely audible. "I never meant for you to know. But tonight, I had no one else." Daniel staggered forward, his hand trembling as he touched the small hand taped with IV lines. Warm, fragile, it stole his breath. He sank into the chair beside the bed, eyes fixed on Joshua. "How long?" he asked softly. 3.5 years. He shut his eyes, breath ragged. "God, all this time, you kept him from me." Aaliyah turned away, her voice raw. "You weren't there even when I needed you most. How could I believe you'd be here for him?" Daniel was silent. No defense. In his mind, sleepless nights of global deals, endless flights, missed promises all lined up like sins he couldn't undo. Joshua stirred, eyes half opening. Seeing the stranger beside him, he whispered weakly, "Mama, who's that?" Aaliyah froze. Before she could answer, Daniel leaned closer, his voice gentler than she had ever heard. "Hi, Joshua. I'm Daniel. I'm your dad. I'm here." The boy studied him, then smiled faintly through exhaustion. "Daddy looks just like me." And with that, Joshua drifted back into sleep. Daniel buried his face in his hands, tears slipping silently, tears he hadn't shed in years. He had missed his son's childhood, his first words, his first steps. He had lost his marriage, lost time he could never recover. But as he held that small hand, one truth thundered in his chest. He could not miss another moment. The hospital smelled of disinfectant, neon lights casting everything in pale shades. Daniel Reyes sat frozen beside the bed, his large hand wrapped around Joshua's tiny one. The boy slept soundly now, breath steady after the fever broke, his round face twitching at dreams. Daniel still couldn't believe it. His son, flesh and blood, a piece of him lying right there after 3 years he hadn't even known. Across from him, Aaliyah sat with arms crossed, dark eyes shadowed by exhaustion but alert. She watched him in silence. No anger, no forgiveness, only a thin sheet of ice between them. Daniel exhaled, about to speak, but when their eyes met, every word died in his throat. The next morning, when the doctor confirmed it was only a common infection, Daniel nearly collapsed with relief. Joshua opened his eyes, spotted him, and smiled faintly. "Daddy's still here," he whispered. Daniel broke, quickly brushing away tears before Aaliyah noticed. He had never known a child could pierce his heart so swiftly. Joshua recovered quickly. During the hospital days, Daniel showed up faithfully, sitting for hours, reading aloud, peeling apples, folding paper figures. Each time Joshua called him Dad, Daniel's chest ached with joy and regret. Aaliyah watched, torn. Part of her wanted to keep him out of their world. But watching Joshua glow with happiness, she couldn't deny it. Her son had longed for a father. When Joshua was discharged on a rainy morning, Daniel offered to drive them home. In the car, Joshua chattered endlessly about the hospital, the ice cream the nurse gave him, and how Daddy tells funnier stories than Mama. Aaliyah gripped the wheel, eyes fixed forward, silent. Daniel kept glancing at her in the passenger seat, wanting to speak but lost for words. Daniel paused at the doorway of her small apartment, taking in the warm, colorful space. Aaliyah's paintings filled the walls, Joshua's toys scattered across the floor, and the faint scent of coffee in the air. Not the luxury penthouse of their past, but alive, full of love he had once abandoned. Quietly, he said, "This home has more soul than any place I've ever lived." Aaliyah gave no reply, only hung up her coat and bent to hug Joshua. In the days that followed, Daniel began showing up more often. He arrived with grocery bags, asked how to cook Joshua's favorite dishes, took him to the park, learned to push swings, and ran clumsily in the grass. At first, Aaliyah watched with suspicion, ready to intervene at the slightest mistake. But Daniel was patient, awkward, yet genuine. Joshua clung to him quickly, his voice bright. "Daddy, Daddy." One night, after Joshua slept, Daniel remained in the living room, a cup of cold tea before him. He looked at Aaliyah, voice low. "I'm sorry. No words are enough. But I'm sorry for all I missed. I want to make it right. Not with money, but with time. With myself. Aaliyah folded her arms, gaze averted. I don't need you to make it right for me, but Joshua deserves to be loved fully. Are you sure you're ready? Or will you disappear again the moment work calls? Daniel hesitated, then nodded. I've changed. The company has strong leadership now. I don't want to race like before. I want to learn to be a father. And if you'd let me learn to be a husband again. Aaliyah frowned, about to protest, but something soft stirred inside her. Weeks passed. Daniel adjusted his schedule, leaving the office early for dinners. Joshua beamed each time he knocked at the door. They cooked together in the cramped kitchen, Daniel chopping vegetables, Joshua on a stool stirring sauce, Aaliyah watching, torn between laughter and tears. These were the moments she had once dreamed of in marriage, now suddenly real. But old wounds did not vanish so easily. One night, Daniel mentioned opening a savings account for Joshua. Aaliyah stiffened immediately. So now you'll try to control everything with money? Daniel faltered. No, I just want to secure his future. The conversation ended in heavy silence. Trust had not yet returned. Still, Joshua was a bridge neither of them could ignore. One afternoon, he drew a family portrait. 3 figures holding hands, one tall man, one curly-haired woman, and a child between them. Joshua handed it proudly to his mother. This is me, Mama, and Daddy. Aaliyah's heart tightened. Daniel was wordless, eyes wet. Thus, the early reunion days unfolded sweet, tense, fragile. Daniel tried to prove himself through every small action, present at bedtime, put his phone away at meals, and read stories until Joshua slept. Aaliyah began to notice, though she still kept a wall between them. The 3 of them slowly formed a rhythm. Weekends at the park, weeknight dinners, Sunday mornings at the farmer's market. Sometimes, when Daniel carried Joshua on his shoulders and their laughter rang out, Aaliyah stood watching, a rush of belonging washing over her, a family. But just as quickly, she reminded herself of the nights of absence, the wounds of abandonment. Daniel understood and did not press. He only persisted, day after day, believing that patience and presence might stitch the fractures of the past. One resolve grew unshakable inside him. He would not miss another moment. Trust, Aaliyah Carter realized, wasn't a door that swung open when someone knocked. It was more like fractured glass carefully pieced together, yet still fragile, needing time to prove if it could hold. Daniel Reyes's return unsettled the rhythm she had built over the past 3 years, shaking the walls she had raised, walls that trembled now, aching to fall yet terrified to crumble. Joshua was the center, so they sat at the same table again. The boy lit up each evening at the sound of the doorbell, dashing out to wrap himself around Daniel's legs. Daddy's home. That pure joy made Aaliyah both smile and ache. Her son had trusted too quickly, as though he'd been waiting for the missing piece to arrive all this time. Daniel tried with everything he had. He left the office at 6 sharp, silenced international calls, and handed more responsibility to his team. Colleagues were shocked, investors grumbled, but he didn't care. Instead of late nights in boardrooms, he spent evenings fitting puzzles with Joshua, helping Aaliyah with dishes, or sitting on the couch listening to his son chatter about preschool. Yet in Aaliyah's heart, every gesture carried a silent question. Is it really different this time? She had once heard his promises and believed she was his priority, only to watch love be swallowed by million-dollar deals. She couldn't forget so easily. One Friday night, after Joshua had dozed off, they sat facing each other over leftover pizza. Daniel unbuttoned his collar, sighing. I know you still doubt me. I see it in your eyes every time I touch my phone. Aaliyah set her glass down slowly. You left me alone too long, Daniel. I can't pretend to forget. Trust doesn't return just because you say, I've changed. Daniel nodded, offering no defense. Then I'll prove it day by day. If it takes 5 years for you to believe again, I'll wait. All I ask is the chance to be here for you and him. The honesty shook her. For a moment, she saw the man from the beginning, the one who had stood before eternal longing, and looked at her like he had glimpsed his soul. Was that man still there? Weeks passed. Daniel remained patient. He took Joshua to preschool, cheered as he wobbled on a bike in the park, and spun endless stories to hear him giggle. When Joshua fell and scraped his knee, Daniel scooped him up, eyes frantic as if the world had shattered. Watching, Aaliyah felt a piece of her resistance soften. This man wasn't just talking, he was learning how to be a father. One summer afternoon, they took Joshua to a park by Lake Michigan. The wind whipped off the water, children's laughter filling the air. Joshua shouted from the slide, "Daddy, Mommy, watch me." Daniel instantly dropped his conversation with Aaliyah and sprinted over, cheering his son on. Aaliyah stood still, watching, and for the first time in years, felt she wasn't carrying the whole world alone. That night, after Joshua slept, Daniel sat by the window, city lights glowing outside. He murmured, "I used to think success meant conquering markets, chasing numbers. But when I see him laugh, hear you sigh with relief. I know now, success is not missing these moments." Aaliyah said nothing, but the words stayed with her for days. Trust still stumbled. One evening, Daniel arrived late for dinner after a sudden meeting. Joshua was already asleep, and Aaliyah sat alone at the cold table. Her gaze at him carried both disappointment and warning. Daniel didn't argue. He cleared the dishes, washed them silently, then sat beside her. "I was wrong. I won't let this become a habit. I'd rather lose a contract than leave you and him alone again." The simplicity of it stunned her. Once, he would have always chosen work. Bit by bit, the wall between them thinned, not with grand speeches but with Daniel's presence. At playgrounds, doctor visits, and in the greasy kitchen where they cooked together, Joshua felt it most. He wrapped his arms around their necks one night, grinning, "Now I have Mommy and Daddy together." Aaliyah looked at Daniel, her heart tightening. In her studio, she began painting differently. No longer silhouettes dissolving into shadows, but families. A child on his father's shoulders, a woman smiling from behind. When asked about the meaning, she said, "It's about learning to trust again." Daniel knew the journey was long, but he wasn't impatient. Loving Aaliyah now meant not only reclaiming her heart, but also showing Joshua what family truly meant. And each day, when Daddy rang through that small apartment, Daniel knew he was exactly where he needed to be. Trust would not return overnight, but in each dinner shared, each smile, each hand held, it rekindled slowly, like a small flame shielded from the wind. And Aaliyah, though she would not yet admit it, was beginning to feel warmth again. That autumn in Chicago was gentler than most. Red maple leaves flared against the cool air, carrying chill and the warmth of new beginnings. That season, Daniel Reyes prepared for the step he had been waiting months to take, to propose to Aaliyah Carter again. Not with the glitter of penthouses or a lavish gala like before, but with the simplicity and sincerity they had relearned together. That night, he brought Aaliyah and Joshua to Horizon Gallery, where they had first met. When Aaliyah stepped inside, she gasped. The room glowed with candlelight, the walls hung with her paintings from the past 3 years, the darkness of separation, the radiance of motherhood, and finally the luminous colors of renewed trust. At the center stood a special canvas. Daniel had secretly asked Marcus to paint. 3 figures holding hands under the rain, light pouring down like a blessing. Aaliyah froze, tears spilling. Daniel knelt, opening a ring box. Not a glittering diamond this time, but a plain gold band, etched with 3 letters, J-A-D, Joshua, Aaliyah, Daniel. His voice trembled, steady all the same. "The first time, I proposed because I thought I knew love. I was wrong. Now, after everything, I understand love isn't a lofty promise. It's a choice we make every day. I choose you. I choose our son. I choose our family. Even in hardship, even in imperfection. Aaliyah, will you marry me again and build this life from the ground up, not with dreams, but with truth?" Aaliyah didn't answer at once. Her hands shook, tears streaming, memories of pain colliding with the tender present. Simple dinners, Joshua's laughter, Daniel's steady patience. She looked to her son. Joshua jumped, beaming. "Mama, say yes, so I can have both Mommy and Daddy forever." His innocent joy dissolved her last defenses. Aaliyah nodded, whispering, "Yes." Daniel pulled her into his arms, Joshua wedging happily between them, the three bound together in a circle no storm could break. The wedding came the following spring, in a small garden by the lake, surrounded only by family and close friends. Aaliyah wore a simple white dress, Joshua in a tiny suit, walking proudly at her side, declaring, "I'm bringing Mama to Daddy." As she stepped toward Daniel, there were no tears of loss this time, only the radiant smile of a woman who had survived the dark and found the light again. Their vows were plain, stripped of ornament. Daniel said, "I promise to be here not only with my body, but with my heart. I promise to put family before meetings and contracts." Aaliyah answered, "I promise to believe in us, but never to lose myself. I promise to raise our child with love, not fear." When they exchanged rings, Joshua clapped wildly, making the whole ceremony laugh. There was no illusion in their kiss, only the simple truth. They had chosen each other again. Life after remarriage was no fairy tale. Daniel still had busy days, Aaliyah faced exhaustion, and Joshua sometimes drove them to the brink. But this time, they had learned to pause, speak, apologize, and repair. Daniel remained CEO, yet he set his phone aside to read to his son every night. Aaliyah kept painting, now with her own studio space in their new home. They shared chores, from cooking to school drop-offs. A year later, they welcomed a daughter, Sophia Elena. When Daniel cradled her, he whispered to Aaliyah, "I once thought I had everything, but only now do I truly have it." Aaliyah smiled softly. Joshua spun around the room, shouting, "I'm a big brother now." The small house was filled with laughter, cries, cooking smells, and paintings on every wall. Not perfect, but vibrantly alive. Sometimes Aaliyah remembered the old darkness, but each time Daniel held her close, Joshua chattered, or Sophia giggled. She knew. The past was gone. The present and future were what mattered. They were no longer the dreamy couple of years past. They were people who had fallen, lost, and chosen to rise again, to relearn how to love, to trust, to pick each other. And in that choice lay the truth they had never fully known at the beginning. Love isn't a miracle that comes and stays. It is a miracle renewed daily through patience, presence, and the courage not to give up. In her studio, Aaliyah hung her newest painting. No title like Eternal Longing or Promise Kept. This one was called Home. 4 figures stood together, hand in hand, with dawn breaking behind them. It wasn't for galleries, it was for them. Proof that a family could be rebuilt more beautiful, stronger when chosen together.